In today's show, I'm going to recap a wealth symposium that I recently attended. We're going to talk about market risk and recessions, interest rates, generational wealth, and happiness in retirement. We're going to relate everything that we talk about to you and your retirement strategies.
Welcome to the Your Life, Your Money podcast with Scott Searins, teaching you how to thrive in life, wealth, and retirement.
Welcome to the Retirement Show, all about your life, your money, and your retirement. I'm your host, Scott Searins, and my goal is to help you thrive in life, wealth, and retirement. And I'm back from the city of honky tonk, city of all the country singers. That's right, Nashville, Tennessee. Recently went there for our AE Wealth Management Wealth Elite Symposium. And what I thought I'd do in today's podcast is bring you the summary of things that I was hearing at this Wealth Elite Symposium in regards to markets, interest rates, elections. I want to go over a topic that was talked about, and I think that we really need to normalize these conversations in regards to generational wealth. And then I'm going to wrap up today in regards to a great speaker that I heard as well in regards to happiness in retirement. So stick around to the end, not necessarily just happiness in retirement, happiness pre-retirement, happiness for anybody of any age. I thought the speaker had a really good 2-minute morning regimen, and we'll talk about that at the end of today's show. So as I mentioned, it was put on by AE Wealth Management. They're a registered investment advisor. Basic, easy way to explain it, they hold my license and help me manage my compliance, provide me a support staff of chief investment staff, as well as a support staff as well. So they put on the Wealth Elite Symposium, a lot of great speakers there, speakers from Schwab, former writers for the Wall Street Journal. We had speakers from Fidelity. So a lot of good speakers, a lot of great information in regards to the topics I mentioned. And so that's what we're going to cover today. Give you a summary of that, what it means to you, what it means to your investments, what it means to your retirement plan. And then as I mentioned, we'll wrap up talking about the 2-minute morning regimen to help create happiness in life and retirement. Thought it was really helpful. So, hey, before we get into that, if you haven't yet, check out our website, lifemoneyshow.com. Again, that's lifemoneyshow.com. A lot of great tools there for you. One, just makes it easy for you to subscribe on your favorite podcast player or YouTube or wherever you like getting your podcasts. Also, we've got videos, podcasts, in regards to a whole lot of retirement topics and subjects, such as reducing the taxes on your IRAs and 401ks, how and when to take Social Security to help maximize your benefit, plus other retirement topics to help you maximize your retirement income and your retirement story. So lifemoneyshow.com. There's also a section in there or a tab in there, a Work With Us tab, if you're looking for a financial and retirement planner. All right, so back to the Wealth Elite Symposium. First, I want to start with the presentations. There's two folks that I'm going to kind of bring together things that they were talking about. We had John Hilsenrath, who's a former Wall Street Journal writer and editor, and then also Liz Ann Saunders, who is managing director and chief investment strategist for Schwab. Both of them had different presentations, but I'm going to bring together kind of what it was that they were talking about at the symposium. First thing that I'm going to bring together is in regards to, let's say, markets and recession and market risks. Now, one of the things that they had brought up, this was really interesting to me. One of the things that Liz Ann Saunders brought up was that she feels that we've experienced individual recessions. When she says individual recession, she meant it as like different industries at different times. And if you think about it, through COVID, some industries weren't doing so well at all, but others were thriving and striving. And as things have kind of gotten out of COVID back into the norm, those that were maybe thriving and striving during COVID are having a downturn, while others are maybe doing better and doing good. So almost this like rotation of recession and recoveries as we, continue to work our way out of COVID. One thing that John talked about was the probability of recession, and how last year the probability of recession the consensus between different market strategists was over 60% of people in 2023 thought we were going to have a recession. Well, how did that turn out? It didn't, right? We didn't have a recession last year. Now, looking at those same strategists, the consensus that he brought up during the meeting there, now it's under 50%. Under 50% of folks think that we'll have a recession here in 2024. So a lot of folks are actually thinking that the returns in 2024 could be single-digit returns. Folks like Sterling Capital, BlackRock, JP Morgan. And then the S&P 500, John mentioned, the expectations for the companies in the S&P 500 is that profits should remain strong this year. The thing, though, that he brought up that I thought was very interesting, because this is what's constant in regards to the market, is market risk. What risk could potentially hurt the growth that we're currently seeing in the market? So he had posted some articles on the screen, one from the New York Times about Russia making advances in space-based nuclear weapons, another one about the Suez Canal and how container ships are avoiding the Suez Canal because of potential attacks on those container ships. And so it's different risks like this that are the unknown risk that at any point in time can create volatility in the market. Maybe the market gets stronger, then maybe the market goes down. Another one that was really interesting risk, and I think we heard all about this throughout COVID, but it's still a very interesting risk that's out there, is the production of semiconductors used for a lot of different items and products that we all utilize. And what was interesting to me is that he brought up that more than half of the production, so over half of the production of semiconductors takes place in Taiwan. Now, a lot of conversations going on right now in regards to Taiwan, potential China invading or attacks or wars, things like that. So really interesting to hear about that, right? So it's all of these like little risks all over the place that could potentially create volatility in the market. Another risk that they had talked about, something that's continuing to change as we've, had this expansion in positive market times over the last year, is that the savings rate, the individual savings rate, they continue to see that go down, and there's an increase in credit card debts and credit card usage, as well as delinquencies. Again, another potential risk that's out there. And the reason why that's a risk is because if you've got too much debt, too much delinquencies, right? And then next thing you know, people aren't able to pay off their debts. Well, that's similar, not exactly, but similar to like what you saw in 2008 when people couldn't pay off their homes. They couldn't afford the mortgages, and that whole thing fell apart. Are we there? I don't think we're, in anything near, what we saw in 2008, but it's interesting just to keep all that in mind. So you're thinking to yourself, okay, so one, recessions, we're seeing that the consensus is most likely not a recession in 2024. Two, second takeaway is that maybe there was individual recessions. So we're kind of seeing things as we go and rotating out of them. And then the third takeaway there was, that there's always these risks that are out there that could impact our economy, that could impact, and if it's impacting our economy, it could impact the market. So how does all of this relate to you and your investments and your investment strategy? Well, first off, one of the things that, one of my takeaways to provide to you is that nobody can predict a recession. We don't know. We don't know what the future looks like in regards to our economy and in regards to what the markets will do. And a lot of that is because of all of these potential risks that remain out there and will continue to remain out there. And that's what's happened in the past as well. Think about 2008. I was mentioning that earlier. Well, that was a risk, right? What happened with folks getting mortgages that they couldn't afford, how they were getting those. All of that was a risk that was being created. And then finally, unfortunately, that risk became too much, and that risk kind of blew its top off, right? Creating that little recession. COVID, a risk that we didn't know about until all of a sudden that risk came about and, really wiped out economic conditions for over a year. And so it's all of these unknown risks that could impact current economy. If it impacts the current economy, it could impact the markets. What does that mean to your investments? Well, I think what it means is what I've constantly been talking about in our podcast and in our videos is that you need to have an investment strategy in place, a strategy in place that aligns with your timeline, aligns with your tolerance for risk, aligns with your income plan. When are you going to need income? Having that strategy in place can help you then ignore all of the things that are going on in the economy, in the market. What I'm talking about today, right? You probably get through it all and just go, wait a second, Scott's saying the same thing. All of these, great speakers and great information and great things that they provided. But at the end of the day, you still have to have an investment strategy that's right for you. Meaning, maybe because of these risks, we see a downturn, we see a recession. Well, guess what? We've seen recessions before in the past. So we've always got our long-term growth money out there that, yes, we're going to see the ups and the downs, and we get through those recessions. And that history has shown us, again, past performance doesn't mean anything about future results, but history has shown us that there's a long-term trend upwards when it comes to holding equities in your portfolio. However, because of those unknown risks, because of the unknowns of when the market will go up and down, we also have to have money that's carved off, that's in less volatile positions if you're getting close to needing retirement income, or if you can't stomach the ups and downs and the volatility in the growth side of the market. So after kind of listening to everything at the presentation, great speakers, hopefully my takeaways here for you are, similar to what I've been saying before, is that you want to make sure that you've got an investment strategy in place that's aligning with you, that's aligning with your timeline, and aligning with your income plan. Okay, next thing that both John and Leslie and Saunders talked about were the Fed and interest rates. I think you're going to continue to see this as a reoccurring theme throughout the year in the news, in the headlines. I know we talked about it a lot in our previous podcast, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I'm going to give you some feedback about what they said. One of the things that Lizanne said that I thought was really helpful, the way that she used to describe the Fed and interest rates, is she said, the old way of how the Fed would do things is she kind of compared it to, they would take the escalator up and the elevator down, meaning they would raise interest rates slowly, but then they would reduce them really fast. Again, why do we raise and lower interest rates? Because they're trying to manage inflation in the economy. Well, she said this time what they did is they actually took the elevator up, right? We saw interest rates skyrocket up over 1 year. But what are they doing in regards to the way down? Well, they're taking the escalator down, meaning they're taking a slow approach about it. What she said is that, right now, inflation is still higher than their targets. She really feels that it's premature for the Fed to start cutting interest rates. And she also had mentioned, which we talked about in a previous podcast, is that their goal is 2% inflation. 2% inflation. Pay attention to that. I didn't say zero. 2% inflation. So what's that mean? We're always going to have inflation in our economy. And I'm going to talk about what this all means to you and how you can relate it to your plan. So right now, it's not if they will lower rates. It's more when will they lower rates. And remember, what does all this mean? What does the Fed and the interest rate targets mean that they're talking about? Well, it's basically setting the rate at which people can borrow or loan money. And if it's tougher to borrow or loan money, then companies may need to cut back. They may need to cut back on their projects. They may need to cut back on hiring. They just might need to cut back. When they cut back and they cut back on spending, let's say people don't have the incomes if they're not hiring, or if they're laying off, then they're not spending as much in the economy. Now, the opposite, right? If interest rates are lower, that gives companies the ability to borrow easier. If they're borrowing easier, well, that means more projects. That means more hiring. That means more spending. That means kind of creating the economic wheel to go a little bit faster. So where are we at? Well, interest rates went up, they rose, and now we're talking about, as she had said, potentially taking the escalator down, a slow potential drop down. But when will they do it? It's not if they will do it. Most likely they will do it, because if interest rates stay high for too long, that could potentially cause recession. So it's not if they'll do it. It seems like it'll be when they will do it, and nobody knows what that means. But what does that mean to you and your plan? And how does all of that relate to you? Well, first off, as I had mentioned, the target inflation rate is 2%. I didn't say 0, I said 2%, meaning we're always going to see inflation in our lives. Inflation when we go to the grocery store to buy groceries, inflation when we go out to dinner and we're paying for, the meal that night, inflation when we go to the gas station, inflation when we go to, pick out whatever services that you do in your life. All of those costs of goods and services that you need in your life, plan on them going up throughout your lifetime. So from a retirement standpoint and retirement planning standpoint, you need to make sure that you're incorporating inflation into your retirement plan. Now, is 2% the number? Not necessarily. I would actually maybe go a little bit higher than that, because again, that's the target they're trying to get down to. But you're going to see times that it's going to be higher than that, times that it's going to be lower than that. So you want to kind of pick an average rate around that target, as that's what they're trying to head towards. So you're always going to have it. So when you're building out your retirement plan and you're saying, well, I'll need $7,000 a month for expenses in retirement, are you adding inflation to that? How about health and medical? When you're saying, okay, I'm going to need, X amount of dollars per year for health and medical. Are you adding inflation to that? That's how you have to look at things to then say, okay, well, have I saved enough to make all of this last? That's what you need as part of your comparison. The other thing in regards to inflation, I mentioned that the Fed's rate, right, is kind of that target rate for people to borrow money. Well, it also kind of sets the rate at which, if you're a saver, that you'll be kind of getting around that rate when it comes to interest that you're getting on your savings. The reason I bring this up is because savers need to be aware of one thing, that if interest rates will be declining, then that interest rate that you're getting on your online savings account or your high interest savings account, that's not going to stay upwards forever. If the Fed lowers their target rate, well, that also means the interest rates that you're getting on your savings will decline as well. So a few things to think about there. One, if it's just, cash that you have, that's kind of your rainy day fund or your reserve fund that you keep around, just understand that you're going to get a lower interest rate on it. Now, if it's money that you're targeting for, upcoming years for income needs or for projects that you need, but you don't necessarily need it right now, maybe it's a year from now or 2 years from now, you might want to consider locking in higher rates with, different instruments like CDs or MYGAs or something like that, where you can lock in, get that rate, that higher rate right now before interest rates get cut and go down. So for savers, that's something that you might want to consider. The other thing is just to understand that, if they cut rates too quickly, that could lead to more inflation. So that's why she kind of talked about them taking the escalator down. You cut it too quickly, leads to inflation. And then the last thing, similar to the first topic, is just to have a strategy. Have a strategy in place. One, have an income plan that includes inflation. have an investment strategy that's going to help you help your retirement savings keep up with inflation over time. Because yes, the cost of goods and services will go up. And I find that sometimes going into retirement, people can actually get too conservative. They feel like going into retirement, they're like, I heard once you retire, you should make your investments conservative. Well, if you're retiring in your late 50s or in your 60s or even in your 70s, you're going to need your money to last for potentially 10, 20, 30 years or longer. And if you need your money to last 30 years or longer, that's a lot of inflation over 30 years. So it's important that you've got a growth aspect to your investment portfolio to help your investments keep up with inflation over your lifetime. All right, that's kind of a wrap on the Fed and interest rates. With that, let's move into their next topic, which was the election. Now, bringing this back here, there wasn't, a whole lot of talk in regards to the elections, but I'm just going to kind of give you my 3 points here as takeaways. Number one, I like this one. Don't trade because of election thoughts. It's a fool's game. Basically, what they were saying is that the election, whatever happens in the upcoming election, isn't going to mean that the markets will go up or the markets will go down. My second takeaway when it comes to the upcoming election is that we're probably going to get a lot of lessons in regards to the Constitution this year. A lot of things going on with the candidates and potential candidates, and a lot of it's going to come back to the Constitution. Again, this is not an endorsement for one person or the other, but it was kind of interesting to think that this year, out of all the years, we're probably going to get a lot of lessons on the Constitution and what it says and what it means when it comes to the candidates being able to, be part of the election. So that was interesting. And then the third part is to expect volatility, expect market volatility as we go into the election and maybe shortly thereafter. The markets, markets meaning like the S&P 500 when I talk about the markets. Now you can't invest directly in it, right? But that is the 500 largest stocks in the United States. So when I talk about the markets, I'm talking about stocks and I'm talking about our economy. And what we've found is that, the markets don't like uncertainty. And as we go into the election, there's going to be a lot of uncertainty of who will win, uncertainty of what does that mean for future taxes, uncertainty of what does that mean for the economy. So just be prepared this year as we go through the year that you might see some volatility or ups and downs in your portfolio as we go through the year. So that's kind of the first section that I want to talk about today. I've got two more, generational wealth and happiness in retirement. But that really wraps up, again, what I heard from Liz Ann Saunders, who is the managing director and chief investment strategist at Schwab, as well as John Hilsenrath, who is a former Wall Street Journal writer and editor. So hopefully you found kind of those points helpful. Nothing kind of out of the ordinary, nothing that we haven't already been talking about, but hopefully it also helps you take that and understand how to relate it to you and your situation through the strategies that we've talked about. Now, the next presentation that I thought was really beneficial, I've talked about this before on the podcast, and I'm a big believer in this, was opening up and normalizing the conversation around wealth. Now, this is a presentation by Laura Mago. She's works at the Fidelity Center for Family Engagement, and it was all about generational wealth and normalizing the conversations around wealth. And, I think people would really like for conversations around wealth to be normalized in the public, right? Or I think that would help. But I get it. There's this sense of privateness, rightfully so, in regards to what we make and how much we've saved up, that we want to kind of keep to ourselves. So one thing that I'm though in support of is normalizing the conversations around wealth and around money in your family. And when I say family, not just between spouses, but also with your children or whomever you're choosing as the beneficiaries for your accounts. And the reason for this, and I thought this slide was really interesting, and I'm going to talk about a story that she brought up as well as kind of a personal story and then kind of how all of this relates to you and what the big takeaways were. But she had put a slide up on the board, and I don't have the slide, and I don't necessarily have where it came from. So I'm not saying that this is fully accurate or not, but I think it's going to be very helpful in regards to our conversation here on the podcast. The slide talked about, and it said 64% of people have not talked to their family about passing on assets. 71% have never discussed the topic with their financial advisor. So whether those, percentages are accurate or not, the big takeaway from it is a whole lot of people that will pass away at some point in time. It's not if they pass away, it's when they pass away, have not been having a conversation with their beneficiaries in regards to the assets that they'll be passing on to them. And Laura's story, and I'm not going to get it perfect here, but I'm going to pass as much of it along as I can just to help you understand it. Her grandmother she'd provide us a story about her grandmother who owned some land. Her grandparents did. When her grandparents passed away, that land then went to the children. Now, they didn't talk to the children necessarily in regards to what they wanted that land to be used for. And this is where things become unique. And you might say, well, hey, I've passed away and it doesn't matter to me. Let them figure it out. But it just really kind of creates some interestingness, I guess to say, can create some, family dynamics, can create some, can really empower or destroy a family by not knowing what you might want with your assets, with your property, with things once you pass away. So in this case, there were then a couple siblings who, thought that land, their grandparents always wanted to build on it. So that then their discussions were that, hey, let's build on this land and rent things out to create more income. Whereas another person really had never hadn't heard that discussion from either of the grandparents, didn't feel that way. Well, then guess what? That was Laura's, parents. Her parents then pass away. Her and her brother now are owners of that land. And maybe one of them could potentially need or use that land for income. And the other folks, though, think, wait a second, the meaning for this land is to build on it, not to sell it and to profit from it that way. And so you can see how now it's kind of created this interesting family dynamic of who reaches out to who and who thinks who is right and what if they want to sell and what if they don't. It can create a lot of interesting family dynamics. I mean, I'll just share a story of myself. In our family, my grandparents actually on both sides, there's family farms. I know, in speaking with my father on my father's side, that's a farm that, my grandparents worked really hard for, to pay off, to own that land and to be able to farm it. Well, then, my grandfather and grandmother, they passed that down to the three brothers. And I've know this because of speaking with my father that it's important to him that we continue to keep that family farm so that someone in the family can continue to farm it versus selling the family farm to profit from it. But see, I know that in advance, and knowing that in advance, that's now important to me. Of course, anybody in the family could always change their mind, and it's going to bring up a lot of dynamics. But knowing something like that in advance can really help keep things in place versus potentially destroying family relationships. So no matter what you have, how much you have, I think it's really important to really start those conversations with your family. And you might say, well, maybe the timing's not right. We'll never know when the timing is right. We'll never know because it's, again, not if, it's when we pass away. And we just don't know when that will happen. So that's why I think it's important to start having those discussions. Maybe it's just the assets that you have and when people need to, what you're hoping people will do with those assets. Maybe it's property that you own and what you're hoping people will do with that property. Maybe it's a business that you own and what you're hoping people will do with that business or what the thoughts for it are. And, a lot of times too, what can help is having a changeover process when the things will start to, change control from just you to you and your beneficiaries having kind of a joint control. And I'm not saying, put their names on accounts or anything like that, but where you're helping to make decisions together. It's almost like you're teaching them, training them. So I'll wrap up on this one. I thought it was a great presentation. And my takeaway here, I did want to provide you a quote. One of the quotes that she had, and I thought this was really helpful. The bigger the airplane, the longer the runway you need. Think about that in regards to your overall wealth. The bigger the airplane, the more wealth that you have, the more property that you have, the business that you have, whatever you have in your scenario, the longer the runway that you need, meaning the more time that you need to help pass on control to the beneficiaries that you hope take over it next. So the takeaway here, hopefully, is that we'll start to normalize the conversations around wealth, at least within our families, because this is an area where I feel like it can really empower the family, or it can also destroy a family because basically the thought processes don't align of how things were supposed to be taken over, how things were supposed to pass on. So again, it's not if, it's when it happens. Hopefully you'll take this note as just a way to think about that for your life and your family. Now, wrapping up, I talked about retirement and happiness, creating happiness in retirement, and it has nothing to do with your money. It has nothing to do with your investments or taxes. This was all about just creating a morning regimen. And I thought that was really cool. So it was Neil Parisha. You can look him up online, but he's a New York Times best-selling author. Looks like he's written the Happiness Equation, 2-Minute Morning, and the book You Are Awesome. Something that Neil talked about, which I think is, there's a lot of truth behind this, is that our brains are wired to look for problems. It's just how we are as humans, kind of that fight or flight thing that we've got going on in our brains. So I just wanted to pass this on to you. Maybe you'll find it helpful. I thought it was really interesting. I'm going to start implementing some of these into my life. Some of these I've already implemented into my life. And I would say I agree that it helps bring happiness to the day and it helps bring happiness to the life. So first off, what he said, which I think is a lot of truth to this, is he said, so it's a 2-minute morning regimen. But before I even got into the regimen, right, he said, let's get the cell phones out of arm's reach. So as you're watching this, how many of you have your cell phones within arm's reach when you wake up in the mornings? Just think about that. Is your cell phone within arm's reach when you wake up in the mornings? And if it is, now how do you grab your cell phone and start looking through it? And if you do, what are you finding as you go through there? Probably news stories, probably a lot of problems with the world's issues in the world's news, things that are going on, to already start basically taking over your day. So how about instead of looking your cell phone, so let's get that out of reach, we'll plug that in another room. Here's this 2-minute morning that I just thought I'd pass along to you. First off, cell phones out of arm's reach, then 3 questions or 3 things, statements that you want to go through. Number 1, what is it I will let go of? So I will let go of. If there's something that you're holding on to, maybe say, I will let go of that, right? A lot of times it just helps us out to get rid of things that are on our chest. I will let go of. So there's number 1. Number 2, I am grateful for. This is what I do in the mornings. I love to go to the gym early in the morning and just spend some time on the treadmill, and I'll say things that I am grateful for. So one thing I'm going to add after listening to Neil is just being a little bit more specific. So I would say I am grateful for my parents. I am grateful for my wife. I am grateful for, fill in the blank, but maybe get a little bit more specific. I am grateful that my wife cleaned up the yard yesterday. So think about that. Maybe add that to your mornings. And then the third thing, I will focus on. So our brains are full of so many decisions that we have to make in a day. So in your 2-minute morning, I will let go of, I am grateful for, and I will focus on. Pick the thing that you want to focus on that day to get done. I'm going to leave you with this quote that I heard from Neil. Thought it was really great. It is easier to act yourself into a new way of thinking versus think yourself into a new way of acting. Meaning, if you want to just think about being happy and think about, well, I'm going to implement this regimen that I heard from Scott on a podcast, and I'm going to think about it and think about it and think about it. We can't just think our way into new actions. We just can't think our way into happiness. But we can act our way into it, meaning start slowly. Get the cell phone out of the room tonight, right? Then the next day, maybe you're just picking one of these things and saying, I am grateful for. So just try something new if you want. Hey, maybe you found that helpful. Maybe not. Maybe you think doesn't help at all, but thought I'd pass it along to you. It was a great takeaway from the symposium and wanted to pass on as much as I can. So hopefully you found all of this information helpful. If so, don't forget, subscribe on your favorite podcast player. And I look forward to our next podcast episode to help you maximize your retirement future. Thanks, and have a great day.
Insurance products are offered through the insurance business Sierens Financial Management, Inc. Sierens Financial Group, Inc. is an investment advisory practice that offers products and services through AE Wealth Management, LLC, AEWM, a registered investment advisor. AEWM does not offer insurance products. The insurance products offered by Sierens Financial Management, Inc. are not subject to investment advisor requirements. AEWM and Sierens Financial Group, Inc. are not affiliated companies. Investing involves risk, including the potential loss of principal. Any references to protection, safety, or lifetime income generally refer to fixed insurance products, never securities or investments. Insurance guarantees are backed by the financial strength and claims-paying abilities of the issuing carrier. This podcast is intended for informational purposes only. It is not intended to be used as a sole basis for financial decisions, nor should it be construed as advice designed to meet the particular needs of an individual situation. Please remember that converting an employer plan account to a Roth IRA is a taxable event. Increased taxable income from the Roth IRA conversion may have several consequences, including, but not limited to, a need for additional tax withholding or estimated tax payments, the loss of certain tax deductions and credits, and higher taxes on Social Security benefits and higher Medicare premiums. Be sure to consult with a qualified tax advisor before making any decisions regarding your IRA. Sierens Financial Group, Inc. is not permitted to offer, and no statement made during this show shall constitute tax or legal advice. Our firm is not affiliated with or endorsed by the U.S. government or any governmental agency. The information and opinions contained herein provided by third parties have been obtained from sources believed to be reliable, but accuracy and completeness cannot be guaranteed by Sierens Financial Group, Inc.